Year 5 and 6, hope you've had a nice day so far. For our next story from Survivors, we're going to be reading about two men called Hans-Peter Strelczyk and Günter Wetzel, and they were German men who flew over a border in a hot air balloon. For more than 40 years, from 1949 to 1990, political differences meant that Germany was split in half and had two separate governments. Germans living in the communist-controlled eastern sector were forbidden from crossing into the west, and a heavily armed border with attack dogs, guard towers and minefields prevented them from even visiting friends and family living on the other side. Nevertheless, there were many attempts to cross the border, and several hundred citizens died trying to reach the west in the belief that life there would be better. Some were shot dead by border guards. Others were killed in the minefields. Still, many refused to accept defeat and often showed considerable ingenuity in thinking up new ways to flee their half of the country. One of the most daring plans was hatched by former aircraft mechanic Hans-Peter Strelczyk and his friend Günter Wetzel, a bricklayer. Keen to smuggle their wives and 4 young children out of East Germany, they realised it was too dangerous to escape by land. Instead, after seeing a television documentary about the early days of manned flight, they decided to try and fly over the border. Their idea was to cross at such a height that the guards below would not be able to spot them and shoot them down. Having worked in the aircraft industry, Strelczyk knew it would be impossible for them to get their hands on an aeroplane. However, he was confident that they could construct a simple flying machine, and the pair decided to build their own hot air balloon. In communist countries, even if you have the money, it's often impossible to buy certain things. The East German secret police, known as the Stasi, would have been very suspicious if they'd heard of someone attempting to buy a hot air balloon or the equipment needed to make one. Because of this, Wetzel and Strelczyk had to be crafty. The balloon would have to be made at home and in secret, using things that the men and their families could obtain without anybody realising that they were planning to escape. They worked out that 4 ordinary household gas cylinders could be bolted together to fuel the burner needed to heat the hot air in the balloon. It would also be relatively easy to make a basket to hang beneath it for the passengers. Both men knew that lifting 8 people would be difficult, even though 4 of them were children. It would require a really big balloon, which meant lots and lots of suitable fabric. They decided to buy the fabric in small amounts and visited many different shops where they would purchase only small quantities each time. To further disguise what they were doing, they pretended they were using the fabric for camping or sailing. This seemed the best way to avoid suspicion, but it meant a lot of travelling and a great deal of hard work to stitch all of the small pieces together. Over several months, the men and their wives, who were called Petra and Doris, spent many hours working on an ancient sewing machine, making a balloon that was more than 65 feet in diameter. None of them had ever made anything like this before, and it took a while to find the best kind of material. Some materials were too thin, and the air leaked out as the balloon was inflated. Others were more airtight, but much heavier, meaning that the balloon struggled to get airborne. With 8 lives at stake, it was essential that they got everything right, and so Wetzel devised a simple machine to test how airtight each type of material was, using an old vacuum cleaner to suck air through the fabric. He measured the amount of air that leaked through, and by weighing the separate fabrics, he determined which type was best. Despite this meticulous approach, the first 2 attempts failed. The first balloon was badly damaged while it was being packed away in a hurry, after the families thought that somebody was spying on them. The second also ran into problems, because so much fuel was used to inflate it with hot air that there wasn't enough left in the tanks to fly across the border. The men were also worried that their secret had been discovered when a story appeared in a local newspaper saying that the Stasi were looking for anyone who might have information about an escape attempt by balloon. When they read the article, the men and their wives realised they would have to either move faster or abandon their escape plan altogether. After discussing it amongst themselves, they decided to have a third go as soon as they could, this time using a balloon that was made from even lighter fabric. The result from Wetzel's experiments suggested that the ideal solution was a combination of umbrella material, tent nylon and taffeta, a lightweight cloth used for wedding dresses and ball gowns. Once again, every effort was made to buy sufficient quantities without arousing suspicion. At weekends, Strout, Chick and the two women would drive out to shops many miles from where they lived. Wetzel and one of the older children stayed at home stitching the balloon. The amount of material they managed to buy would have covered several tennis courts. Even so, bed sheets had to be used to complete the balloon when several of the shops ran out of supplies. The families now had to work very fast to ensure the balloon was completed before the end of the summer. The wet weather would make it impossible to fly safely, and the Stasi might come looking for them. And we'll find out what happens to the men and their families